racism other than a very surface level grasp of it. Now, there's one clip I saw when John made a comment about David Novi being the house guest's slave, and there was a female house guest, I don't know the name, I'm really sorry, and she pipes up straight away and she goes, "Hey, you can't say that," and that is the moment where I rolled my eyes, because that is a clear-cut example of this surface-level understanding of racism that most white people tend to have. Now, if that makes you feel uncomfortable and you are white, that's very unfortunate, because people who aren't white have always felt uncomfortable being victims of racism. So if you are finding this hard to hear, I really do suggest you continue listening, because perhaps it's about time that your eyes and ears were opened up. So this surface level understanding of racism really falls into a black and white category of things you can say and things you can't say. Now, we make things very black and white and simple when we try and teach children how to navigate their world. So we teach children, you can say these words, you can't say these words. And then as they grow up, they learn more about history. As children grow up and become adults, they learn more about religion. As children grow up and become adults, they learn more about geography, politics. However, racism doesn't seem to follow that same trajectory. It is stuck in this field, in this black and white field, in this really simple, broken down field of words you can say and words you can't say. And whilst that is very relevant and very important, and we all know language is incredibly important, it is not enough. There needs to be more development, because, as I said, it is incredibly difficult to make white people understand racism on the same level as a non-white person understands it. So, let's continue.
He is a teacher.
That female housemate that piped up and said, "Hey, you can't say that." Again, that goes back to that very black and white surface level understanding. But there was no follow-up. There was nothing that female housemate, house guest did
Get the terms right.
to protect David and Ovi from further ridicule and from further dehumanization. And the word slave obviously has some very ugly connotations, and I guarantee that house guest buried her head in the sand and promptly forgot about it as quick as she could, because the truth is, it's very hard to deal with, it's a very ugly topic, and it does make people feel incredibly uncomfortable. However, if you're a victim of that racism, you won't just feel uncomfortable, you'll feel robbed, you'll feel dehumanized, and dehumanization is one way that you can really cause someone to feel like nothing. And John and Jackson go on to dehumanize the non-white housemate. So I've seen a clip of Jackson making monkey gestures upon seeing David. Again, likening a person to a monkey. Not only is it cheap, very unintelligent, but it's very offensive. It's not nice, it's nasty, and ultimately it's dehumanizing. You're taking that person's humanity away, and you've likened them to a monkey. It's an animal, it's not a person. There's another moment where he says blue flames and then changes it to brown flames, which, again, doesn't make sense. It's a very abstract concept. It's very strange, it's very weird, but it's certainly not human. It's certainly not natural, and it's certainly informed by the colour of that house guest's skin, which again goes on to dehumanize that house guest. There's another clip I saw, and non-white house guests were, I think it was Kemi, she was referred to as cancer. Now, cancer is a disease. It's a growth, it's a tumour, it's a collection. It's a collection of cells that slowly sap away energy, they destroy someone's life, and they have such a devastating effect on the people they kill Cancer is such an ugly disease, and the fact that you can just attach something like cancer, something as serious as cancer, something as devastating, something as hurtful, something as painful as cancer to someone solely based on the fact that they aren't white is so disgusting and intrinsically evil. It's actually quite sickening. There's another moment where a comment is made to Kemi about her having little Chinese eyes. And again, this sets a kind of precedent that being white is a sort of default, and then anything other than that needs extra clarification. Like, what's wrong with her eyes? It's genetics. There's nothing about Bella, I think her name is. There's nothing about Bella's eyes that affect her character, that affects the strength of her character, that affects her personality. It is just the shape of her eyes. But the fact that they mentioned it because she was sat in the sun and squinting and they weren't, sets being white as a default, sets having white features, rather I should say, as a default. There's another moment where John and Jackson go on to further dehumanize a non-white house guest when they simply refer to David as N-word bro. How unfortunate. How ugly. How horrific. And the reason I use those words is because that is the reality of racism. Racism is very ugly. Racism is very horrific. The first thing you notice about someone is the color of their skin. And there's nothing you can do to hide that. If you're a misogynist, you hate women, you can go and attack a woman. However, women have the ability to make themselves appear more masculine. As a man, I have the ability to make myself appear more feminine. I can walk down the street. Okay, I'm very tall. It's very unlikely. But potentially, I could pass as a female. If you're a woman and you'd like to perform the male gender, it's very likely that you can do so, walk down the street, and you can perform the other gender. I'm gay. If I walk down the street without holding my boyfriend's hands, without waving a rainbow flag, without doing something stereotypically gay, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to look at me, ascertain that I'm gay, and use that to discriminate against me.
True.
If I were a lesbian, again, it's very difficult for you to ascertain that I'm a lesbian unless you see me actively and outwardly and openly performing lesbian. If I'm black, there's nothing I can do about that. If I'm Asian, there's nothing I can do about that. If I'm white, there's nothing I can do about that. However, society affords privileges to people that have white skin. And that's the reality of it. And that's what makes racism so hard to deal with. It could potentially be the problem it could potentially be the reason that this network allows this racism to go unchecked and doesn't show it to the viewing public. Perhaps the network cares more about the ratings than it does about the health and well-being and happiness. And I say health, and I'm referring to their mental health here, of the other house guests. Perhaps it could be racists protecting racists. And that's the true ugliness of racism. There have been situations where I've gone and had jobs, and I've looked around the office, and I've seen a sea of white faces, and lo and behold, I haven't gotten the job. Okay, perhaps I wasn't qualified. Perhaps I interviewed poorly. Perhaps my experience wasn't good enough. But it's very telling that things like that happen. However, I can't help but shake the feeling that if I were white, perhaps I would have gotten those jobs. Who knows? I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I know what I've seen, I know what I've noticed, and I know my experience, and my experience as a black person is very different to an experience of a white person. The reality is, racism is frightening because you don't know who's discriminating against you. You can't see it. You don't see it in someone's eyes. No one wears a badge saying they're a racist. It just happens. It happens to you. People can discriminate against you, and you don't even know that they're discriminating against you. And that is the true evil of racism. Again, the reason that it's so difficult to explain racism to white people in a way that white people will understand empathetically is because of something called systemic knowledge. If you have no knowledge of the system, then you're unable to learn from it. Let's talk about schematic knowledge as well. It's very unlikely that a white person will have schematic knowledge of how racism works. Let's give you an example. If I give you a flowchart and I go through it step by step of how to build a plane engine, and then I give you a box of plane engine parts, I can guarantee that the second I take that flowchart away, you will be unable to build a plane engine. And that's because you have no schematic knowledge of how to build a plane engine. It's not something you're familiar with. You're not a plane engine builder. You're unlikely to know how to build a plane engine. So the chances are you will fail. And it is the same with racism. You're unlikely to be a victim of racism. You don't know how it works if you're not racist yourself. And you are unfamiliar with the myriad of ways that society affords non-white people, or people that aren't white, to be discriminated against. And it's very difficult for white people to understand that because they're very unlikely to become victims of that. And the reality is that is frightening, because we end up in a situation where people say racist things and it's easier to bury our heads in the sand, do nothing about it, and then allow that person that's saying racist things or acting in a racist manner or allowing racism to perpetuate to continue doing so. And the reality is, when John and Jackson start talking about mule kicking people and stomping holes through people's bodies and other disgusting, violent imagery, that actually inspires people to do the same. And actually, I guarantee if those clips went out on television, there would be people inspired to commit those things, those atrocities, those acts against people who aren't white, for the simple fact that they have seen it justified. And the reason it's justified is because someone has so much evil inside them that they are able to formulate that concept, that idea, utter it aloud to other people and not receive any backlash. And someone viewing that will see the reaction, will read that as a positive reaction, and will be inspired to go out and attack someone simply for the color of their skin. And that's the real danger of these networks. So in a way, it's good that they're not allowing this racism to be broadcast. In a way, it's the best thing they can do to protect people out there. But the reality is, it will go on unstopped. It won't be dealt with. It will continue to perpetuate. It will manifest into something ugly. And this network will have a problem on its hands unless they do something very soon. And I really hope they come to their senses and they take a stand against racism and stomp it out, because it is really, really, really ugly, really hard to deal with, and as aforementioned, incredibly difficult to explain to someone who is unlikely to be a victim of racism. And I'm not saying white people are not discriminated against.
We're not.
However, I think it's very, very, very uncommon in comparison to the experiences of those who aren't white. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. Again, thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to...
What about me?
Get my thoughts across. It's not often I get to speak like this, so again, thank you so much for listening. I also want to say Lindsay and Gaz work so hard to prepare. Okay, Lindsay and Gaz's livers work so hard to get them through these podcasts. But no, they do it for the fans. So just thank you guys so much for supporting my boyfriend and the lovely Lindsay. And I'm going to hand this over to you guys. Thank you so much for giving me the time of day, really. Bye!